The Screaming Staircase, Chapter 18. To get from the London offices of Lockwood and Company to the village of Combray Carey is a fairly simple business. All it takes is a quick taxi up to the street to Marylebone Station, a leisurely wait at Platform 6, and finally a gentle 40-minute train ride through rolling grey-brown suburbs, then the wintry Berkshire fields, before you arrive below the mossy flanks of St. Wilfrid's Church, an old Combe Carey station. An hour-and-a-half journey tops. Easy, quick, straightforward, and as pleasant as a trip can be. Yeah, right. That's the theory. But it isn't so much fun when you're helping to carry 6 supermassive duffel bags weighed down with metal, plus a rapier bag with 4 old ones stuffed inside as spares. And you have a brand new rapier at your belt getting in your way. It also doesn't help if your leader and his deputy both conveniently mislay their wallets, so it's you who has to fork out for the train tickets and pay supplements for the heavy luggage. Or that you spend so much time haggling you end up missing the first train. Yes, all that really improves your mood. Then there's the small matter of heading toward one of the most haunted houses in England and hoping you aren't going to die. This last factor wasn't improved en route by George's giving us a full briefing on the things he discovered over the previous 2 days. He had a binder filled with neatly written notes, and as the train poodled cheerily past the spires and the ghost lamps of villages hidden in the wooded folds of the gentle hills, he regaled us with nasty details from them. Basically, it seems what Fairfax told us was right, he said. The halls had a bad rep for centuries. You remember it started off as a priory? I found a medieval document about that. It was built by an outfit known as the Heretic Monks of St. John. Apparently, they turned away from the lawful worship of God to an adoration of dark things, whatever that means. Before long, a group of barons got wind of this and burned the place down. They took over the priory's land and divided it among themselves. Possibly a setup? I said. They framed the monks in order to take the land? George nodded. Maybe. Since then, it's been owned by a succession of rich families. The Careys, the Fitzpercys, the Throckmortons, all of whom benefited from the wealth of the estate, but the hall itself is nothing but trouble. I couldn't find too many details, but one owner abandoned it in the 15th century because of a malign presence. It's almost burned down 2 or 3 times, and get this, in 1666, an outbreak of the plague killed off its inhabitants. Seems a guest turned up at the door and found everyone inside lying dead, except for one little baby left crying in a cradle in a bedroom. Lockwood whistled. Shh, Grizzly. That would be your cluster of visitors right there. Did they save the baby? I said. George consulted his notes. Yeah, he was adopted by a cousin and became a schoolteacher, which is a tough break, but he was lucky to get out. Anyway, the bad vibes in the house continue right up until this century. There have been a succession of accidents, and the last owner, before Fairfax, a distant relative, shot himself. No shortage of potential visitors for us, then, Lockwood mused. Any mention of this screaming staircase or the dreaded Red Room? One fragment from Corbett's Berkshire Legends. George turned a page. It claims 2 children from Combe Carey were found unconscious at the bottom of the old steps in the hall. One died right away, but the other recovered sufficiently to report being beset by a foul and devilish hallucination, a cruel and unholy outcry. He snapped the folder shut. Then she died too. What's a ululation? I said. That would be the screaming. Lockwood stared out at the passing landscape. Stories, stories. What we badly need are facts. George adjusted his glasses in the complacent manner. Aha, maybe I can help you there too. From inside the folder, he brought out 2 pieces of paper, which he unfolded and set on the little table beneath the window of our compartment. The first was a hand-drawn floor plan of a large building, showing 2 extensive levels, each with walls, windows, and stairs carefully rendered in ink. Here and there were annotations written in blue: main lobby, library, Duke's chamber, long gallery. At the top, in George's neat little handwriting, was written West Wing, Combe-Carey Hall. "This is superb work, George," Lockwood said. "Where did you find it?" George scratched his pudgy nose. "The Royal Architecture Society on Pall Mall. They've got all sorts of plans and surveys there. This one was done in the 19th century. Look at the great staircase. It's an absolute monster. Must dominate the hall. The other plan," he swapped the papers over, "is much older. Might be even be medieval. It's a very rough sketch, but it shows the place when it was still basically the ruins of the priory. It's much smaller, and there are a lot of rooms that must have been knocked down when they rebuilt it as a house, because they're not on the latter map. But look, you can see that the massive staircase is already there, and also the areas that became the lobby and the long gallery. The long gallery was the monks' refectory, where they ate. Some upstairs rooms correspond to the 19th century plan too. So between them," George said, "these plans tell us where the oldest regions of the West Wing are." "And that," Lockwood said, "is where the ultimate source is most likely to be." "Excellent. We'll start our searches in those areas tonight. What about the other material I asked you for, George? Can I have a look?" George produced a slim green file. "There you go. Everything I could find on Mr. John William Fairfax." As he said, he inherited the place 6 or 7 years ago. Didn't seem to put off by its reputation. Anyway, you've lots of articles on him in there. Interviews, profiles, that sort of thing. Lockwood settled back with the file. Let's see. Seems that Fairfax is a firm advocate of fox hunting, likes hunting and fishing, supports a lot of charities. Oh, and he was a keen amateur actor in his youth. Look at this review. Will Fairfax gives an intense performance as Othello. The mind boggles, but it makes sense in a way. He's a bit theatrical even now. "That's not really relevant, is it?" I said. I was still studying the floor plans, tracing the curve of the staircase, pondering the location of the infamous Red Room. "Oh, it's good to have a full background to a job." Lockwood became engrossed. Conversation faltered. The train rushed on. Once or twice I touched the front of my coat, feeling a small hard outline hanging beneath, the case containing the ghost girl's locket. I'd kept it on me, safe, just as Lockwood had instructed. I hoped he was right, that we'd soon bring her story to a conclusion. Assuming, of course, that we survived the night at Combe-Carey Hall. Outside the village station, a car was waiting for us. A tussle-haired youth lounged against the hood, reading an old issue of True Hauntings. As we staggered out under our burden like 3 trainee Sherpas back from Everest, he lowered the magazine and regarded us with callous amusement mixed with pity. He touched his forelock in a slightly ironic gesture. "Mr. Lockwood, is it? Got your message. I'll take you to the hall." Our bags were stuffed into the back with some difficulty. George and I squeezed in alongside. Lockwood bounded into the front beside the driver. The taxi veered out onto the road, sending ducks squalling across the village pond and me sprawling headlong into George's lap. Grimly, I levered myself upright. The lad whispered, whistled through his teeth as we drove between dark gray elms. No extra ironwork on the car, I see, Lockwood said, by the way of conversation. No need around here, the boy replied. Safe district, is it? No visitors around? Nope, they're all up in that house. The boy turned sharply to avoid a pothole, so that I was flung bodily across George's lap again. George looked down at me. Want a hand? You can stay there if it's easier. No, thank you. I can manage. You mean Combe Carey Hall? Lockwood was saying. Good, that's where we'll be staying tonight. In the new wing, or the old Bert Starkins caretaker? In the main house. There was a pause, during which the youth took his hands off the wheel to cross himself, touch a small religious icon on the dashboard, and spit ritually out the window. He looked at the rearview mirror in a ruminative manner. I like that red duffel bag, he said. I could use one for my football gear. Mind if I nip up to Hall tomorrow and ask for it? Mr. Fairfax wouldn't be wanting it, would he? Nor old Starkins. Sorry, Lockwood said. We'll still have need of it tomorrow. The youth nodded. I'll drop by anyhow, he said. No harm in seeing. We drove uphill through the straggling woods amid a tangled grid of cold, dark fields lined with winter greens. You ever been inside the hall? Lockwood said. What? You think I'm crazy? Well, you must know something about it, though. About its haunting? The youth turned abruptly up a narrow side lane, a miracle of last-minute steering, so that everything in the back of the car shifted violently to the left, and my head was brutally sandwiched between the window glass and some soft portion of George's face. For a few seconds I heard nothing except his breathing in my ear. By the time he pried himself loose with much gratuitous fumbling, we had passed through a tumble-down gateway and were racing up a long, straight drive. Murdered, hidden, and never found, the boy was saying. That's how it all began, I reckon. Everyone around here knows it. One death leads to another, and so it becomes a chain of deaths that'll keep on growing as long as the house shall last. Whole place should be burned down and salt sown on ashes. That's what my mum says. Not that we can get the owner to see that kind of sense. He's so set on his little experiments. So, here we are. That'll be £10.50 plus 2 for the extra bags. Interesting, Lockwood said, particularly the first part. Thanks. We had come to a halt at the end of the gravel drive. Though my window I saw rolling parkland spotted with oaks and beeches and part of the lake, I'd noticed in Fairfax's photograph. It all had a wild, unkempt look. The grass was high and the lakeshore overgrown with matted sedge. On the other side, past George, I could just make out the pale trunk of a tree, 2 vast urns on plinths, and behind it all, the blank gray stone of a house. Lockwood was busy talking with the driver. I got out and helped George with the bags. Combe Carey Hall rose vast and tall above me. The air was dank and chill. Far above, long brick chimneys sprouted like horns against the clouds. This left-handed portion of the house, which I assumed to be the older western wing, was mostly of ancient stone, switching to brickwork near the roof and on the margins. It was a great number of windows, of many sizes and a variety of levels, each one blankly reflecting the gray November sky. Cracked columns supported an ugly concrete portico above the double entrance doors, which were reached by a splaying flight of stairs. A monumental ash tree of considerable age and size stood by the far end of the wing, its bone-white branches pressed against the bricks like the legs of giant spiders. To the right of the entrance stairs, the smaller eastern wing was also brickwork, but clearly modern construction. By a curious accident of architecture, the wings were set at a slight angle to each other, so the effect of the entire house subtly reaching out to encircle me. It was an ugly, oppressive mongrel of a building, and I'd have disliked it intensely even if I hadn't known its reputation. Lovely, Lockwood said cheerily. Here's our hotel for the night. He had been talking animatedly with the driver for a surprisingly long time. As I watched, he handed over a wad of notes, considerably more than $12.50 a pound, and sealed brown envelope. You'll deliver it, won't you? He said. It's important. The youth nodded. In a shower of gravel, the taxi roared away, leaving behind a smell of fear and gasoline, and the sight of an elderly man descending the steps of the house. What was that all about? I demanded. Little package I needed posting, Lockwood said. I'll tell you later. Hush, George whispered. This must be old Bert Starkins. He is old, isn't he? The caretaker was certainly very ancient, a tight and desiccated thing from which all softness and moisture had long since been extracted, where Mr. Fairfax had been bullishly vigorous despite his age, and infirmary, this man was more like an ash tree by the house, gnarled and twisted but holding tenaciously to life. He had a shock of gray-white hair and a narrow face that disintegrated as he drew near into a web of lines, a limestone surface with bumps and fissures. His clothes carried an air of somber correctness, and he was dressed in an old-fashioned tailcoat of dark black velvet, from the sleeves of which gray, silver-spotted fingers protruded. His striped pants were incredibly thin, his shoes as long and pointed as his nose. He came to a halt and surveyed us dismally. Welcome to Combe Carey. Mr. Fax is expecting you, but is presently indisposed. He will be ready to receive you shortly. In the meantime, he asked that I show you around the grounds, introduce you to the hall. His voice was broken and quarrelsome, like the rustling of willow fawns. Thank you, Lockwood said. Are you Mr. Starkins? I am. I've been caretaker here for 53 years, man and boy, so I know a thing or two about the place, and I don't care who knows it. I am sure you do. That's excellent. Where shall we put our bags? Leave them here. Who's going to take them? Not the inhabitants of the hall, I'm sure. They don't stir before sundown. Come then, I'll show you the gardens. Lockwood held up a hand. Excuse me, but it's been a long journey. Do you have, any facilities nearby? The net of wrinkles grew deeper. Shadows enveloped the old man's eyes. When we get to the house, boy, I can escort you now. Mr. Fairfax wants to show you the interior himself. It's a bit urgent. Cross your legs and wait. Well, you could give me directions. No, impossible. I'll just nip behind one of those urns, then. No one will know. Starkins scowled. Up the steps, across the lobby, little room to the left of the stairs. Thanks so much. Won't be a moment. Lockwood hurried away. If he can't hold it in now, the old man said, how will he cope tonight, when the lights begin to drain away from the long gallery? I don't know, I said. Lockwood's behavior had slightly perplexed me, too. Well, we don't have to wait for him, Starkins went on. He pointed up at the western wing. This stonework marks the oldest portion of Combe Carey. It's the shell of the original priory. You can see one of the chapel windows there, built by the notorious monks of St. John. Ah, they were a wicked order. It's said that they turned away from God to worship of dark things, I murmured. Starkins looked at me askance. Who's doing the tour? Me or you? But you're right. Such depraved sacrifices and rituals. Oh, it's terrible to think of. Think of it. Well, the rumor spread, and finally the priory was sacked by the barons. 7 of the wickedest monks were thrown down a well. The rest were burned inside the building. Yes, they all died screaming inside those walls. By the way, I've prepared your beds in the guest rooms on the first floor. They're in suite bathrooms, too. You've all the mo- you've all the modern conveniences. Thanks, I said. Is the well still open? George asked. No, you could still see the disused well out here in the courtyard when I was a lad, but they sealed it up with an iron plug years ago and buried it in the sand. George and I scanned the silent building for a time. I was trying to work out which, in Mr. Fairfax's photograph, had been the window with the apparent spectral figure standing at it. It was very hard to tell. There were several potential candidates seemingly up on the first or second or third floor. Are the monks the ultimate source of the haunting, do you think? I asked. Sounds like they must be. It's not my place to speculate, Bert Starkins said. Might be the monks. Then again, it might be mad Sir Rufus Carey, who built the hall from the ruins of the priory in 1328. Ah, here's your weak-bladdered friend back. About time, too. Lockwood was pattering towards us, a spring in his step. Sorry about that, he said. Have I missed anything? We were just hearing about mad Sir Rufus, I said. Starkins nodded. Yes. He was known hereabouts as the Red Duke on account of his flaming hair and addiction to spilled blood. It said he brought his enemies to a torture chamber deep inside the house where he hesitated. No, I can't say more. Not with a young girl present. Oh, go on, George said. Lucy's terribly jaded. Look at her. She's seen it all. I have seen a lot, I said sweetly. The old man grunted. Let's just say they provided his nightly entertainments. When he'd finished off each one, he'd set their skulls on the steps of the central staircase with candles burning behind the eye sockets. Starkins's aged, roomy eyes rolled in horror at the thought. So it went on for years until the stormy night one of the victims broke free and cut Sir Rufus's throat with a rustled manacle. From that day to this, whenever the Red Duke's ghost stalks the corridors, you can hear the souls of his victims howling. They say it's like the very staircase screams. Lockwood, George, and I glanced at each other. So that's the origin of the screaming staircase? Lockwood asked. Starkins shrugged. Maybe. Have you ever heard it? I said. Not a chance. Wouldn't catch me going into the hall by night. Well, what about anyone you know? Have they heard it? Any of your friends? Friends? The caretaker's forehead creased in puzzlement at the concept. It's not my place to have friends. I'm a servant of the hall. Well, let's continue the tour. Old Mr. Starkins took us on a rambling circuit of the house, pointing out external fixed features and giving us a canned speech. It soon became apparent that, in his opinion at least, every stone and tree had some horrid association. Sir Rufus and the monks had set the tone. Almost all of the subsequent owners of the hall had been mad or bad, or a messy combination of both. As they hacked and strangled their way down the years, countless killings had taken place. Theoretically, any one of them might have contributed to the terrible atmosphere of the hall, but the sheer volume of antidote was both numbing and hard to believe. I could see Lockwood struggling to keep his incredulous smile off his face, while George dawdled behind, yawning and rolling his eyes. For my part, I soon gave up trying to remember all of the stories and spent my time studying the house. I noticed that the main entrance aside, there were no obvious exits from the ground floor, except in the modern east wing, which Mr. Fairfax used. His Rolls was parked outside this door. The chauffeur stripped his shirtless sleeves despite the bitter air, stood polishing the hood. In the grounds beyond the east wing stretched the boating lake, drab and kidney-shaped. Nearby were rose gardens and a tall round tower with ruined battlements. Bert Starkins pointed. I draw your attention to Sir Lionel's Folly. An unusual tower, Lockwood ventured. Wait for it, George whispered. The old man nodded. Yes, it was from the top of that tower that Lady Caroline Throckmorton threw herself in 1863. Lovely summer evening it was. She stood astride the crenellations, skirt flapping, silhouetted against the blood-red sky, while the servants tried to coax her back in with tea and seed cake. No good, of course. They said she stepped off as casually as if she was alighting from a bus. At least it was a serene end, I said. You think so? She screamed and flapped her arms all the way down. There was a short silence. Wind ruffled the cold waters of the lake. George cleared his throat. Well, it's a nice rose garden. Yes, built where she landed. A pleasant lake where old Sir John Carey perished. Took off for a swim one night. Then, say he swam to the middle, then dropped like a stone, weighed down by guilty memories. Lockwood pointed hastily to a little cottage surrounded by shrubs and hedges. What about that house? Never found his corpse. They didn't. Really? Shame. Now, that cottage, it's down there still, cradled among the mud and stones and old drowned leaves. I'm sorry, what did you say? That little house? What's the appalling story about that? The ancient man sucked his gums meditatively. Ain't none. There's nothing? No. You sure no suicide pacts or crimes of passion? Must at least be a quick stabbing or something, surely. The caretaker appraised Lockwood in a thoughtful manner. Perhaps, sir, you'd be making one of your clever college jokes about me? I wouldn't dream of it, Lockwood said. And actually, I've never been to college. Perhaps you don't believe the tales I've told, the old man said. Like cartwheels slipping in thick mud, his rheumy eyes swiveled around to George and me. Perhaps none of you do. No, we do, I said. We believe every word, don't we, George? Almost all of them. Bert Starkins scowled. You'll discover very shortly whether or not what I say is true. In any case, there's no ghost in that cottage because that's where I live. I keep it clean of visitors. Even from a distance, the iron defenses dangling from the tiled roof were clear. The old man said no more. He stalked onward, rounded the final corner, and led us back to the front of the house, where we discovered our duffel bags had been moved to the top of the entrance steps, and a tall, emaciated figure stood at the open doors, waving his iron-handled walking stick in greeting.